Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So before we begin with our oversight hearing today, we will conduct a brief business meeting to approve the authorization of the Women's Veterans Task Force. The text of the resolution has been sent to the members earlier this week. I'm proud to reauthorize the bipartisan Women's Task Force, and I'm proud to name Representative Radewagen as the Republican co-chair of the task force. The task force will identify and raise awareness to the issues that are specific to women veterans within health care benefits and employment programs. Strengthening VA's commitment to providing the services that address the needs of women veterans is a top priority of mine. Women are the fastest growing group of service members and veterans. The VA must be able to keep up with their needs, just as they do with the entire veteran community. I look forward to seeing the great work that the Women's Veteran Task Force will accomplish. Our work ensuring the needs of women veterans is met and will not end after the 6 months of the task force. I expect all subcommittees to use what they will learn during the task force roundtables to inform their discussions on how to best serve women veterans throughout Congress. I'd also like to thank Ranking Member Takano for working with me to tackle the challenges facing women veterans. And is there a discussion on the proposed resolution? Representative Takano?
You want me to move and can I have comments?
No, yeah, any comments you might have.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Bost. Today I'm incredibly pleased that we are once again recognizing the important role of women veterans that women veterans have played in service to our country by taking up a resolution to authorize the Women Veterans Task Force for the 118th Congress. So I applaud Chairman Bost for continuing this effort, originally started under a Democratic-led Congress and championed throughout the 116th and 117th Congresses. And during these Democratic-led Congresses, the task force served as an important tool in advancing equity in the provision of access to resources, benefits, and health care for women veterans. And as the number of women veterans continues to grow, we must remain steadfast in our efforts to ensure these veterans can fully access the care and benefits they have earned. And much of this work was led by then chairwoman of the task force, Congresswoman Julia Brownley. I know her tireless efforts will continue in this Congress as she serves as co-chair and works to gather input from the women veteran community and make recommendations to the committee on how to best address the needs of women veterans. These efforts must continue, especially in light of ongoing efforts to restrict access to reproductive health care. It is shameful that women veterans are being targeted in this effort. Diminishing women veterans' access to health care and gagging providers and veterans so that they cannot discuss health care concerns is unacceptable. These restrictions have never been imposed in other federal health care settings on anyone but women veterans. Criminalizing, infantilizing, and denying women veterans equal access to the full spectrum of health care at VA, including comprehensive reproductive health care, is unpatriotic and an affront to the millions who have worn the uniform. House Democrats are committed to ensuring women veterans have equal access to the full spectrum of care at VA, including reproductive health care. When a woman puts her life and body on the line for our country, we promise that her life and body will be cared for as equally as we care for the lives and bodies of male veterans. They fought for our freedom, and they deserve that same freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to privacy, and freedom to access comprehensive health care. Last summer, Congresswoman Brownley and I spent time on the road holding listening sessions with women veterans, and we heard repeatedly what they want from their VA: a safe and welcoming environment, free from harassment, quality full-spectrum health care, including reproductive health care, and facilities that serve their needs. Last week, VA announced changes to its outdated and exclusionary motto. Words are very powerful tools, and any veteran, family member, caregiver, or survivor visiting a VA healthcare facility or sacred resting place in a cemetery should know that VA is and always will be a place for them, that all veterans' service is valued and recognized, and that this country will always be grateful to them and those they leave behind. Making a VA welcoming and a trusting place for all who served isn't a radical idea. Instead, it is a clear message to the public, including young girls who may wish to serve our country in the future, that all veteran service is valued. That's a pretty strong retention tool that costs very little, but yields tremendous results. More than 2 million living women veterans have fought for and defended our country's core founding principle, freedom. And that is why they served, and that is why they continue to serve in greater numbers than ever before. There is no doubt women veterans deserve our nation's gratitude and appreciation, but more importantly, they deserve access to the comprehensive health care and benefits they've earned, and assurance that in their transition to civilian life, there are no discriminatory barriers to achieving access to meaningful economic opportunities. So I look forward to the task force's work on ensuring our nation lives up to the promise we have made to women veterans. So thank you, Chairman Bost, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize Mrs. Radwagen for a motion to approve the resolution authorizing Women Veterans Task Force.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee adopt the resolution authorizing the Women Veteran Task Force.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the resolution is approved. I ask unanimous consent that all members shall have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks from today's business meeting. Hearing no objection, so ordered. This concludes our business for today, and this business meeting is adjourned. Now we can go to the committee, full committee. The committee will come to order. I would like to welcome Secretary McDonough, where we received VA's budget request 2 weeks ago. The request will again look to an increase in the department's budget. The request attempts to tackle hospital maintenance, backlogs, investment in mental health, community care, and works to end veterans' homelessness. Congress has always prioritized the VA budget. Despite all of the accusations about cutting care and benefits for veterans, which is not true, Mr. Secretary, I will always support giving you the resources you need to carry out the mission. As a veteran and the chairman of this committee, this is my #1 priority. I also expect and demand that we be good stewards of the taxpayers' investment. When a budget grows as fast as VA has, there is always, I'm sure, waste. The committee has already started highlighting it. VA is spending billions of dollars on management consulting contracts. The department also owns or leases a huge number of empty or nearly empty buildings all over the country. And VA is wasting hundreds of millions of dollars a year on failed IT projects. I hope you will work with me, as you always have, to eliminate the waste and find better uses for that money. That said, I have some concerns about how the budget request is structured. It has far too many gimmicks in it, and today's gimmicks are tomorrow's headaches. The Toxic Exposure Fund is just the beginning. Let's not overcomplicate this. We have been building hospitals with discretionary money for 30 years. Why do we need one construction fund that uses discretionary and another fund that uses mandatory money now? We have always paid the claims processes salaries out of the same account. Why do we now need to pay them from a different account, now depending on the type of claim that they're working on? There has been a process for a long time called the second bite, where VA revises its medical care request during the year. It exists for a reason and it works. Why should we get rid of it? I don't believe anyone intended to use the Toxic Exposure Fund to replace that. The more complex a budget is, the harder it is to manage and have transparency, as these complexities make VA less accountable to the veterans they serve. We are already dealing with some unintended consequences from changes in the budget. The last thing we need to do is create more. I look forward to digging into this issue today And Ranking Member Takano and I now recognize you for your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Bost. Mr. Secretary, welcome. And thank you for appearing before us today. I believe that budgets reflect our priorities and values, and I'm glad that President Biden's priorities for veterans align with mine. I'm thrilled to see that the budget request includes investments that will strengthen veterans' health care, bolster mental health services and suicide prevention programs, support women veterans, prevent and end veteran homelessness, begin improving VA's aging physical infrastructure, and modernize VA information technology for future generations of veterans. I'm also glad that the administration is requesting significant funding for implementation of my Honoring Our PACT Act, the largest expansion of VA benefits and care in generations. I look forward to learning how resources dedicated to PACT Act implementation will be allocated across different programs. However, while I'm glad to see the overall increases to the budget for VA in fiscal year 24, I want to highlight a concern of mine regarding VA not requesting a second bite. I share the ranking member's concern about the second bite. Many of our freshman members are going to, what the heck is the second bite? We're going to delve into that question today. It has been the custom in previous budgets that we have a second bite. VA healthcare is funded through an advance appropriations process, and the so-called second bite allows VA to adjust its previous ask to Congress to address unexpected changes to healthcare costs, such as new prescription drugs coming to market or increased costs for labor and materials. Instead, this year's budget relies on a request of over $21 billion to the Toxic Exposure Fund, which was only appropriated at $5 billion for fiscal year 23. That is a significant difference. Relying on the Toxic Exposure Fund as a means to address increasing budget demands is a risky proposition when VA has other tools such as the second bite. Now, I want to understand the intent behind this proposal, especially in light of the volatile budget climate we find ourselves in. As I'm sure you're aware, House Republicans have advocated for a return to fiscal year 22 baselines, which would decrease funding for VA and put implementation of important laws like the PACT Act at risk. Now, I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will take umbrage at this statement, but let's be clear. This is not fear-mongering. It is fact. This has been widely reported as part of the deal struck to appease MAGA Republicans in exchange for votes for Speaker McCarthy. I'd love for them to correct the record and prove me wrong, but maybe they'll do that today. If we return to fiscal year 2022 baseline spending, the math does not work in veterans' favor. I understand the chairman of the Budget Committee said this week that even if we cut spending for the entire federal government in half, he would not be satisfied. That's the chair of the Republican chair of the Budget Committee. That statement is deeply troubling. Which half wins? Which half loses? The Department of Defense and corporations, the top 1%, or veterans, children, and seniors? Members throw these words around but don't consider the math or the consequences of what they say. And I have deep concerns that subjecting VA to large and arbitrary budget cuts would undermine VA's ability to deliver on the promise we have made to our veterans, most significantly, the promise implied in the word PACT in PACT Act. PACT is a promise. I'm also concerned with the level of funding for infrastructure in this budget. Year after year, we discuss the age and disrepair of VA facilities, yet we continue to see funding levels that are not realistic for solving the problems. As we've already seen in certain facilities, the lack of funding for improvement is jeopardizing the access to care for veterans, and we continue to ask veterans to support a healthcare system that is not well maintained and modernized for their needs. I hope this year that appropriators will step up to the plate and provide funding for VA to finally address these issues and not make veterans wait any longer for improvements to their facilities. Now, I also want to address another infrastructure issue, which is the amount of money that VA invests in modernizing its IT systems. VA is modernizing almost every major IT system in the department, which I support and which I believe is long overdue. What I don't support is VA continuing to fail at these endeavors. And thus, I've introduced 2 bills this week to address these issues. First is a short-term solution requiring independent verification and validation of these major modernization efforts. And the other is the Manage VA Act to create an undersecretary for management at the VA. Numerous other federal agencies have such a position. VA is the second largest government agency with an important mission and a large budget, but it is not run this way. We need to provide programmatic, budget, acquisition management support, and standardization across the department to ensure that as budgets continue to grow at VA, we are spending that money appropriately and providing the best health care and access to benefits for veterans. We need to give VA the tools it needs to succeed. And with this budget request, it is clear to me that President Biden, you, Mr. Secretary, and I share many of the same priorities. I firmly believe we can make responsible budgeting decisions without reneging on our sacred promise to our nation's veterans, and I look forward to continuing our conversation today as we discern what this budget request forecasts for the future of VA. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and in response, if I may, so I do feel, but first off, we agree on a lot, and from your opening statement. I also need to say that I do believe you're trying to, many of your colleagues and yourself are trying to drive fear into our veterans for something that is not and is not being talked about. And I would request to put into the record a quote of a press release yesterday at 5:50 p.m. from the Appropriations Chairwoman Kay Granger. And in it, and I quote, "Republicans are working on policies that will grow and strengthen our economy. We will also find ways to reduce spending without impacting our nation's defense, our commitment to our veterans, or the services that Americans depend upon." So I just want to put that into the record, but I do thank you for your comments and look forward to working together. Now, Mr. Secretary, I know that you're here today, and we're glad to have you here. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to recognize you for 10 minutes for your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Takano, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My thanks in advance as well to the new members, including many among you, veterans yourselves. Thank you for continuing your service to this country. VA will be strengthened by this committee's work, so I attach great importance to our relationship. I pledge to each of you my candor and transparency as we work together on these important matters. Let me start by telling you a story about Army veteran Vika Mars. In 2019, Vika developed a cough that wouldn't go away. So she went to urgent care, where she was diagnosed with a lung mass and then stage 4 lung cancer. Despite 11 years of honorable service, she thought she didn't qualify for VA care and benefits because she had deployed as a reservist in a non-combat role, albeit into Central Command. That was until she received an email from VA this past fall telling her about the PACT Act. Vika said, for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried. I submitted my paperwork. It was such an easy process. Today, thankfully, Vika's cancer is in remission. Her claim is service-connected, and she's getting the care she needs with VA. There are many veterans with similar stories. We're delivering now more care and more benefits to more veterans than at any time in our nation's history. Vets had over 115 million clinical encounters in the past year, nearly 40 million in-person VA appointments, 31 million telehealth appointments, 38 million community care appointments. On benefits, we set a record of over 1.7 million claims processed, and we're on pace to break that record this year. Since the PACT Act was signed last August, veterans and survivors have filed more than 1.25 million claims, 25% more than same period last year. I think we all agree that veterans, including those like Vika, deserve our very best, and with this budget, we can continue serving them with that. This year's budget request is $325.1 billion, the largest investment in U.S. history for veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. This year alone, this will mean 411,000 vets attending their first VA healthcare appointment, joining approximately 9 million other enrolled vets. 308,000 veterans and 56,000 families receiving their first earned benefits, in addition to the nearly 7 million we currently serve. And over 140,000 veterans and family members being interred in dignified, lasting, resting place. But this budget is about more than numbers. It's about preventing veteran suicide, our top clinical priority, which gets $16.6 billion in this budget. It's about ending veteran homelessness, which gets $3.1 billion in this budget. It's about supporting health care for women veterans, which gets over $1.2 billion in this budget. And it's about restoring VA's severely aging infrastructure. At nearly $10 billion, this budget recognizes that the traditional approach to infrastructure has fallen short of providing veterans with the modern environments of care they deserve. No investment in this critical budget is more critical to our success than the investments in people we hire and retain here at VA. So we are incentivizing hiring, quickly onboarding staff, and incentivizing retention. We hired more staff at VHA in the first quarter of this year than in any previous year in the history of VA. I'm proud to report that we hired 2,465 registered nurses, 465 licensed practical nurses, 788 nursing assistants. We've hired more people in these three critical occupations than at any other time in the last 20 years. Overall, we've onboarded 23,000 new hires this year, on our way to meet our goal of 52,000 new onboarded VHA employees. At VBA, we used regional hiring fairs to interview thousands of applicants and extend same-day job offers to nearly 1,100 applicants, putting us on track to fill all 1,871 of the authorized PACT Act hires. These new members of the VA join the best workforce in the federal government. Brittany Walker was hired at the Central Alabama VA healthcare system this last November. Brittany's siblings, both grandfathers, many other family members have served in uniform. Now Brittany's serving their brothers and sisters in arms in a mission that's deeply personal to her. That's the kind of deep devotion that characterizes VA's workforce. This Monday, we mark the 20-year anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, a war in which many of you and many of your friends served and sacrificed. The work of caring for the brave men and women who fought that war and their families, survivors, caregivers, is in full swing and will only grow. America made them a promise. It's our job at VA to keep that promise. So we're looking forward to collaborating even more with you to build on what's working and to fix what's not. I look forward to your questions. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are going to go to questions, and I would like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. So, Mr. Secretary, you know, the new mandatory construction account bothers me a little bit. We are going to struggle to authorize these projects. There could also be favoritism in which projects get put into which account. So I need to know, why did you request this, and doesn't it risk going back to the bad old days of politics determining where hospitals get built?
Yeah, thanks so much. As with every dime in this budget, we will actively work, collaboratively work with you on oversight and on careful investment of each dime. We have a three-pronged strategy on infrastructure. One, non-recurring maintenance. That is keeping those facilities that we have running. Two, minor construction and leases. This is to maintain and grow access, including in so many of your districts where there is such broad growth of veterans. And then third, major construction, which allows us to replace entire VA medical centers. The reason we asked for the number we asked for is because in the last 10 years, VA has replaced 4 hospitals. 4. Even though the average age of a hospital in VA is 62 years old. The average age of a hospital in the private sector is 13. I think that is an indictment of how we have invested in construction in the last decades. It's because, look, a lot of that blame rests with us. We did not effectively manage the Aurora construction. But since Aurora, we've had 3 very well-managed replacement facilities, including in Orlando, where it came in under budget and ahead of schedule. But even Orlando is now bursting at the seams because of veteran demand. So the thing that will drive every investment in infrastructure is where the veterans are. And we know that data. We share that data with you. And every decision we will make will be pursuant to our established processes that we brief you on at least quarterly. That strategic capital investment project and program is an effort by us to let the data and the veterans' requirements drive those investments.
Mr. Secretary, you're asking for $20 billion in toxic exposure fund next year, but you aren't even planning on spending at least $3.5 billion of that. Why are you requesting money that you can't or won't spend?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I heard the comments from both you and the ranking member on the TEF, and I know our teams have been meeting regularly on this. I talked earlier this week with the Inspector General. I've just sent him a letter. I've asked, and obviously he's going to do this in all cases, that he give particular focus to the TEF and the investments we make in the TEF, to include the methodologies by which we count what we spend in the account and the process by which we report that to you. But the PACT Act is a new way of doing business. And importantly, you gave us authority in there that said any dollars above for toxic exposure-related care and benefits above the FY21 baseline can be moved into the TEF. We've done exactly that and no more in this budget. Exactly what you allowed us to do. And my commitment to you on this is the same as my commitment on everything else. We will not spend one dime that we've not talked to you about, that we've not briefed you about, and that you're not comfortable, that you're not aware of and understanding of the methodology for which we're making those decisions.
Okay, that kind of leads to my follow-up question. You're already asking for $21 billion more than toxic exposure funds for 2025. Isn't it too early to estimate that, especially when we are still have not spent money from 2023 and 2024?
Yeah, thanks very much. We're letting the data drive this for us, and I know we've been talking to your teams about it. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, for the first time, as near as I can tell, and I think I've been around Washington now longer than I would have ever anticipated, and surely than I care to admit. But I've never seen VA go set up a claims clinic at the Pentagon. That's what we did yesterday. We had encounters with 1,200 DOD personnel who have deployed to CENTCOM, like so many of you, in the last 3 decades. The data is telling us what we need in the fund. We have our methodology. We're talking to your staff about it. We'll be more than happy to continue to talk to you about it. And as I said, I've taken the extraordinary measure of asking the IG to make sure that he's spending whatever time he can on this question. Because, look, I'm very excited about the PACT Act, but let's be clear, it is a new way of doing business. And it's a big piece of business at that. So that requires the kind of investment that you gave us the authority to use in that act, and this budget uses it.
Thank you. My time's expired. Ranking member, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, I want to get back, continue on this line about the PACT, the TEF.
Uh-huh.
You know, the TEF was, I think, envisioned as a way to avoid pitting toxic exposed veterans against other veteran programs and to protect, to prevent those same veterans from competing against other discretionary priorities, right? And so this choice to not ask for a second bite, a one-off given the new budgeting dynamic, is this choice to not ask for a second bite a one-off given the new budgeting dynamic, or is it something we should expect to see in the future in future budget requests?
Yeah, look, I mean, we ask for what we need in the budget and not a dime more. We used the authorities you gave us to ask for the TEF. We assessed based on that we don't need the second bite. As we've briefed this out, including with other members on the Hill, both sides, I think there's some appreciation because frankly, as you know, the second bite in the last couple of years has been in a lot of different places. So I know it is the tradition, and I know it's a tradition that we may avail ourselves again of in the future, but it's not like everybody loved the second bite in the first instance.
Well, but here's the thing, though. The way that are doing the CBO and the scoring of bills, the whole way we've set up the TEF has frankly, it's interfered with other priorities, such as my friend Julia Brownlee's bill, the Elizabeth Dole bill. I mean, it was all ready to go, but then this whole new situation, we need experience and spending experience. And if it's not clear, this idea of using TEF money instead of asking for a second bite, it just sort of muddies the water in terms of how we're going to be able to score these bills going forward. And so I don't understand why we can't make a clear delineation with sort of the non-toxic exposed expenditures that you have, and not having a second bite sort of muddies this. Do you understand what I'm trying to ask you here in terms of? It's because it appears to me that what's happened is that you've simply increased the TEF request to make up the difference between what would have been the first bite and the second bite.
Yeah, no, what the authority in the act, this historic act, that all of you, especially you, Mr. Takano, played such a critical role in. The authority says dollars above FY21 baseline for care or benefits associated with toxic exposure can be placed in the TEF. That's the decision we've made here. That's the authority you've given us. That's the decision we've made. I have great respect for CBO, but I can't speak for them. But let me just say one other thing, which is you also said this question about making sure that the discretionary fund doesn't get crowded out. As you know, I've in fact, last year had a very good exchange with Mr. Bost on this. This is one of the places where he and I don't see the same, eye to eye, but we asked for the third budget category for medical care last year. We repeat that ask this year. That's where we're trying to protect the discretionary account across the board, not in the TEF. The TEF, all we do is what the statute says we can do. And again, we'll talk to you about how we came to the conclusions. We've talked to your team about the methodology for those conclusions. We got nothing to hide here. We're just doing what you gave us the authority to do.
I'm not saying you're hiding anything, Mr. Secretary. I'm befuddled. So I think I'm aligned with you on trying to get our arms around the medical account, especially the care in the community and what's driving that. And I would urge you to come up with a plan and make it clear how you're going to get
I've been trying.
your arms, and I get it's hard. But if we need to, what do you need from Congress on that? But maybe stay focused on this TEF issue. You know, if the appropriators decline to provide VA its whole TEF request of $20.3 billion, which is entirely possible because they didn't give you the full amount you requested previously for the TEF last year, has VA placed itself in an untenable position by not asking for the second bite? What happens if you don't get the $20 billion is what I'm trying to ask you.
Yeah, I'm not conceding that we're going to fail on that. You know, I think that the appropriators understand. We've been talking to them too. And what we've done here is use the authority that was in the Act. I think it's a recognition that the Act is a new way of doing business. And you're absolutely right. We don't want to get to the end of the whole idea in the TEF. We don't want to get to the end of the year and have so many new, say, for example, post 9/11 vets coming in for care and somehow wrestling over a limited medical care account. So somehow we have to choose between, you know, vets of other eras and vets of the post 9/11 era. The TEF allows us to have confidence that, as you said in your remarks a minute ago, we're not going to have to pit different kinds of care against one another. And that's what we've done in this request, and I think it holds up to scrutiny. And believe me, it's been closely scrutinized across the street at the OMB, and already, I think, being closely scrutinized by your staff who are very sharp-eyed, I've noticed.
Well, Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I just want to say I hope that some other member of the committee will pursue this issue about the discretionary spending. Why is that needed? But there's been only, you know, exactly one briefing for committee staff on the day that the president released the budget, and then VA took more than a week to provide its complete budget books to the committee. I just want to get you to commit to that we'll have more staff briefings in the near future.
You've got my commitment on that.
All right, I yield back,
Many as you
Mr.
want.
Chairman.
Yep.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Representative Radewagen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Talofa. Thank you, Chairman Bost and Ranking Member Takano, for holding this hearing today. And thank you, Secretary McDonough, for your testimony. A special thank you to Representative Brownlee for your help in organizing the Women Veterans Task Force this year. I look forward to working with you as co-chairs to address the needs of our female veterans and bring some actionable items before this committee over the next 6 months. I want to applaud VA's budget proposal for prioritizing hiring more women health professionals and recognizing that women veterans are the fastest growing veteran population. Secretary McDonough, while the number of women veterans served by VA has steadily increased over the last 5 years, the fact remains that over half of all women vets are still not using VA benefits or services. Other than hiring women's health personnel to fill in the gaps in female-focused care, what are VA's plans to encourage women veterans to use the benefits and services they've rightly earned? And what is VA doing to get the word out and ensure that women veterans feel safe and welcome at VA?
Talofa, thank you very much for the question. We now serve about 600,000 women veterans. About 300,000 of those women veterans are of childbearing age. In FY21, we had about 6,000 deliveries. We anticipate about 10,000 deliveries this year. So the trend line is up, but it's not near up as high as we would like it. Among the things just to follow your questioning, you're obviously intimately familiar with our investments in what we call gender-specific care, which allows us to hire specific specialists and to buy specific technology critical to women's health care. So in addition to that, we are using the PACT Act to message women veterans in particular. We've had more outreach events, including events specifically focused at women veterans across the country than in any time in VA history and since the president signed that act into law. And we've been using our local vet collaborative efforts, including most recently in the Pacific, where we had more Pacific-based veterans participate in our outreach event than ever before, and 38% of the participants were women veterans. So what I've given you here is a series of inputs. We'll see what the output metrics suggest over the course of this year in terms of women veterans filing claims, getting service connection, and getting care. We'll maintain an open line with you on that, but there's no higher priority for us as it relates to outreach than ensuring that more eligible women veterans get their care. Last point. Last week, we changed our mission statement to more completely incorporate the passion and the commitment from President Lincoln in our mission to make sure that every veteran in the country, including women veterans, see themselves in VA facilities. That's going to take more than changing the mission statement. It's going to require us to do the things you're talking about and to include ensuring women feel welcome and safe at VA facilities, and that they can get the full suite and access to care that they need.
Thank you. I also had a question. I'm out of time now, pretty much, about telehealth and broadband, but I will submit that for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and thank you for your announcement and the change of the motto. I think it's terribly important, and we've had these discussions for a long time, and I think women veterans across our country will applaud it very much.
Nobody's more demanding of it than you, and I didn't want to have to face you one more time without having done it.
And I don't want to spend my whole 5 minutes on TEF again, but I do want to just point out, you know, the problem is the way CBO is now scoring. And I know you said that CBO is, you can't account for them, that's their department, but the problem is the way they're scoring it is the appropriators are saying, for example, the Elizabeth Dole bill, they're scoring it at an astronomical price, and the appropriators are just saying with regards to TEF, well, we just kind of have to see how this goes, you know, before we can really begin to account for any of this. And so as a consequence, it sounds to me, based on the appropriators' response, is that we're going to have to wait years before we initiate any new programs, and I would argue that Elizabeth Dole, for example, would actually save VA resources that can be reinvested into other programs. And that's, you know, it's kind of that's the dilemma, you know, that we're just the PACT Act is really important and the execution of it is really, really important, but it could stifle everything else in terms of good things moving forward for veterans. So if you have a comment, great. I just wanted to get that point across.
Well, I can guarantee you I wouldn't be the first administration official to disagree with a CBO ruling or a CBO score. But I think I probably should stay out of that. I'd be more, you know that we feel really strongly about the caregiver program. If there's something that we can, you and I have had this conversation, if there's something more we can do of our own authority to move out the way that you guys want us to move out smartly on that, I would be happy to do it. That's on the merits and on the substance. On the scoring, again, I just don't feel like I'm in a position to help on that.
All right. Well, just, you know, based on long-term care, the Elizabeth Dole bill, it does seem like in the budgeting request for fiscal year 24, you're still allocating 65% of the resources to institutionalized care. That's how it appears to me. And so to me, that's a problem, you know, because that's we want to get away from that, and that's the way I read the budget, is that the VA's fiscal year 24 request of $12.9 billion really represents a similar spending dynamic from previous cycles in terms of institutionalized care.
Well, I'm happy to look at that, but the fact is that the budget anticipates a growth of at least another 1,000 participants in the caregiver program for the year ahead. We've seen remarkable growth in that program. We're working with you aggressively on that to make sure that we're acting consistent with your intent on it. So, but the fact also remains that there is a high degree of demand for long-term care facilities in the country. And I think that there is a cultural and individual based shift, I think, that we're in the middle of. We're making certain assumptions about how quickly that shift will be carried out. But I think we're pretty realistic about this in the budget. But again, I'd be happy to continue that conversation.
Thank you, and I just have a few seconds left, but I just wanted to bring up funding for care for women veterans. Deborah Sampson mandated that a 5-year plan be submitted to Congress for retrofitting VAs across the country to address women and their health care. And so that report says that there's 75 projects nationwide, accounting for $609 million in total estimated costs. I think we know that maybe 5 or 6 of those projects have been done, and then you have a capital or construction and long-term capital planning section within the VA that allocates a whole lot of money, but there's no delineation of, does that cover more resources for retrofitting for women? And can we carve something out so that we can track that?
Yeah, sure. So I think we can get you more of this specific data. Here's how the process works for us. As I talked about it a minute ago in reaction to the chairman's questions, we have the 3-pronged strategy. All that then is run up against our strategic capital improvement plan. And so the way that we work that is across the enterprise, our systems can appeal to be included in the SCIP, the Strategic Capital Improvement Plan. We rate those, our team rates those individual projects. Those projects that are designed expressly for access to gender-specific care are given a quantum or a premium in the scoring on the SCIP process. So as we, so in fact, there is a way in our existing processes to prioritize the fastest growing cohort of our veterans, women, and ensuring that our facilities are reflecting the needs that they have. And so I hope that's helpful. I think there's a way for us to cut that data for you so you can show it and not take my word for it. But that is the way we try to make that work within the context of our existing programming.
Very good. I hope the VA is demanding that retrofitting for women's health is happening in these facilities. But I hear you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. General Bertman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary McDonough, you, I think, lead the only bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. that has the potential to have a heart. Because that's not core of bureaucracies, just like corporations, the heart. But the heart of your bureaucracy is based upon the sacrifice of the men and women who, through their service and through their willingness, enabled us to still be the United States of America. So you and I have had a chance to dialogue, to talk, look at each other eye to eye on many occasions, and I can only thank you for never giving up on what it really means, which is to take care of the veterans, to take care of their families, to enable them to take next steps, whatever that might be. You've got a big challenge because of the fact that the decisions that you were forced to make are largely viewed as, by those who aren't deeply into it, as monetary. And again, the heart drives that, but as we sit up here on the dais, it doesn't make any difference what side. We are faced with the challenges of how do we allocate, if you will, or how do we decide on what we do as a committee to enable you to do your job. And right now, I think if you looked at the two pots of money in the federal spending, you know, we're 70+% mandatory spending, which we don't spend a whole lot of time on, which concerns many of us who are trying to do better and make improvements, but sometimes improvements are, you're required to reduce things in the area. So in one area to give to another, and when you put it into mandatory, that kind of limits our ability to do that. But in this particular case, why does your budget take money out of regular discretionary medical care accounts to increase the toxic exposure fund?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bergman, and I really appreciate the comments. As I was saying to the chairman and to Mr. Takano, as I understand the motivation for the TEF in the first instance back last summer was to try to ensure that there was a way to not end up through our standard budgetary process of pitting different characterizations of veterans against one another. And so by giving us the authority in the TEF to take any incidental dollar invested in benefits or care above FY21 baseline for toxic exposure, we would avoid that. And so that's what we're trying to do. Not trying to limit any additional oversight. In fact, I'm inviting additional oversight, including from our IG. And I've just committed again to additional briefings, as many as we need, to Mr. Takano. What we're trying to do is be consistent with the statute, and I think there is some wisdom in the statute in trying to make sure that we have the investments we need. And I think we've worked really hard since the bill was enacted to come up with a way to do that, and to come up with a way to do that that stands to oversight, that stands to scrutiny, and we'll hold ourselves to that standard going forward.
Thank you for using the key word, oversight.
Yes.
And I know you will do that, and I know I don't have much time left, but as we move forward with still dealing with suicide prevention, and I would ask maybe to take for the record here, is VA considering looking at partnering with any other entities when it comes to really evaluating potential breakthrough therapies in suicide prevention, to include the continued expansion of care in the community? And lastly, when you think about what are we really trying to do for veterans, and that is to give them the outcomes, and give them the outcomes in an expeditious manner because they're at risk. And having said that, we will not see a reduction in the risk if we, as the bureaucracies, do not change and enable the free market to provide those veterans with everything from independent care to appeals process to get better claims. So I just wanted to thank you for all you've done. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Yield
Bergman.
back.
Representative Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great to see you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your good work. Thank your entire team for their good work on behalf of our veterans. Wanted to hit a few different items. Wanted to start with the Veterans Transitional Assistance Grant Program, which was established as part of the Isaacson-Rowe Act. The program is designed to support local organizations that provide coordinated transition assistance services such as resume assistance, interview training, and job recruitment training to veterans and their spouses. Can you provide an update on implementation of that?
In all candor, I can't because I didn't study that provision this week. But
No problem.
Let me make sure I get you an answer on that.
You got a lot on your plate, I know that. So back in 2021, VA estimated full program implementation would cost $26.3 million per year, but the budget request says only $1.3 million for this program, and the fiscal year 24 request includes $5 million. So our hope is that you can clarify when full funding will be used to fund that program, which is only authorized for 5 years, and hopefully you can, in addition to providing the information, can commit to moving expeditiously to provide an update and fully fund that.
Count on that.
Great. Let's shift to infrastructure funding. There's a $10 billion request for construction, which does appear to be a pretty significant increase from previous years, but the devil's in the details. Your own budget request noted full implementation of the skip list would cost about $130 billion. There's $5.7 billion for non-recurring maintenance, which I think continues the trend of using inefficient short-term solutions to sort of piecemeal facilities together. There's $2.3 billion in discretionary funding set aside for major and minor construction, which really is a drop in the bucket of what you need. 2 years ago, by comparison, Kaiser Permanente, and granted, Kaiser and VA are very different. VA is a very different entity, but Kaiser told the Senate they invest 3% of their overall operating revenue on facilities and infrastructure. And then the independent budget VSOs, they've noted their concerns with the fiscal 24 request. So my question for you, Mr. Secretary, is when will VA begin appropriately prioritizing its capital asset needs in the budget? Perhaps I should be directing this at OMB as well, but I'd love your insights on this.
Yeah, thanks so much. For just 1 second on the NRM, the non-recurring maintenance. That is a big number for non-recurring maintenance. But you know what? We have a very good track record on using those dollars expeditiously, transparently, and to good effect, including, keeping facilities updating facilities consistent with care requirements. And so we think that's a good investment. We think we can execute it well. I guess I would say that I welcome us investing even more in infrastructure. Our argument, which has been made in a lot of different ways, and this was a big topic last year because it was before we were about to announce our recommendations, our comprehensive recommendations consistent with the PACT Act. But at nearly $10 billion here, we're talking about more money than we've ever asked for in the past. And we're more than happy to talk you through our whole skip list and how we work that. That is the basis on which we make these decisions. The more money we have, the farther we can get down the skip list. But we're also mindful of the economy we're working in right now, where there's a lot of construction in the country. There's a lot of demands for inputs to construction. So we also want to be clear-eyed about this. So if you get the sense that we're not sharing with you the full picture, it's true that our annual budget isn't the full picture of our skip list. We'll be more than happy to come brief you on that.
Appreciate that, and would just remind all my colleagues and for our freshmen that are here that polling on the popularity of investing in veterans infrastructure is off the charts. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, it's at 80+%. People want to see better investments in VA hospitals and infrastructure. Last question I have time for right now, Mr. Secretary. Back in 2020, we authorized an increase in the grant and per diem rate during COVID-19. That's set to expire on May 11th. It'll bring the maximum rate to $58.55. In your view, is that adequate for high cost of living areas to recruit and retain staff and provide high-quality services?
We're already having a problem, and you and I have talked about this in San Diego. I was just in Seattle last week. This is a major problem for and I talked to Mr. Banks yesterday about the importance of this program in Fort Wayne. This is a very important program for us to meet our shared goal of getting every veteran under a roof. And I think experience is showing us right now that those rates aren't enough to keep the kind of staff that we need to help ensure that we're doing the outreach and getting people into houses. So I don't have a specific proposal for you today. We're working this question, but we're very proud of the work we're doing on veterans homelessness, but we won't be satisfied till we're done with it.
Just in closing, couldn't agree more, and we so appreciate all the work you're doing to try to house homeless vets. And my concern is, as I know many others are concerned, is that this is going to set us back and could considerably set us back. So I appreciate all your work there, and I'll yield back to the chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. I just want to make a quick comment on the statement of the, we do need to add to the buildings and do our building. Maybe we should talk to our good friends over in the Senate and have them actually appoint the Air Commission, and then we can actually move forward with that too. But that law was just a suggestion for them. With that, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for coming today. I'm a proud representative of the 6 most veterans in any district in the country. In fact, 1 in 7 of my constituents is a veteran. And you add active duty military with Camp Lejeune and the other Marine bases, it's a big deal in eastern North Carolina. I'm going to bring up the issue that I spoke with you just a few minutes ago, I just want to let everybody know about this because in the Doctor's Caucus this morning, we talked about drugs coming into this country from China. The 90% of our APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, come from China today, and our FDA is doing an absolute abysmal job in looking at these drugs, seeing their purity, seeing their impurities. And what happened in 2016 was that the VA, and I don't understand this policy, and we talked about it, I'm not going to reiterate something we've already talked about, but the fact that the VA Schedule 65 IB allowed drugs to come from non-TAA, Trade Agreements Act country, which includes China. The DOD does not allow this, and we're now, so subsequently, allowing drugs to come to our veterans, as well as other drugs coming into this country that are not being analyzed, are not being reviewed, are not being inspected. And so this is an absolute troubling thing to me as a physician, but it's really more troubling to me that this is what's going into our veterans. And we now, like it or not, ballistic or not, are at war with our greatest adversary. We saw this with a balloon. We saw this with the absolute flood of fentanyl coming into this country from China. So, I don't expect you, we talked about this earlier, you're not aware about this, and that's nothing against you at all. But I would like a commitment from you, and I know I can stand by this, that this issue will be researched, because it is absolutely, I'm ineffable about this. I can't understand why this was done. I know everything is about saving money, but if we're giving our veterans drugs that have not been inspected, that is absolutely dangerous upon this country. So I'd just like your commitment that I'd like to get back. I'd like some ruling on this. And if there is any way to get out of this commitment in 2016, I think for the sake of our veterans, we need to explore that.
Yeah, you've got my commitment, Mr. Murphy, absolutely.
It is a big deal. We're trying to, one thing that the pandemic, there are some silver linings that brought back into this country, that we're absolutely reliant on our greatest adversary for drugs in this country, and we are coming in absolutely blind, not knowing what we're taking every day, and these are going into the bodies of our veterans, and it is not satisfactory. So I'll shift on this a little bit. We're talking a lot about money and efficiency, and you're asking for a lot of money. I did some calculations just on the old interweb, got these the other day, that the VA spends 5 times more per patient than the United Kingdom does in their British healthcare system. So I'm going to disagree a little bit with my colleagues on the other side of the dais that more money is always a good thing, because we're being absolutely, and I've worked in VAs, I've visited the VA clinics, we're being absolutely abysmal in our efficiency in spending. Do you have a department of efficiency, or are you relying on outside consults or folks to come in and tell you about what is efficient, what is not efficient? Because we're not spending our money wisely, and just throwing money at something is not the right way to bring the best care to our veterans.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Murphy. I think we would put VA outcomes for our vets up against anybody, most particularly the UK system. I think that that's the most important measurement for us.
Agreed.
What is the outcome, and the VA outcomes are first rate. One. Two, we're constantly measuring efficiency of outcome. Right now, we're going through a process, I think.
I'm just going to interrupt you. I understand that, but it's a big deal that we spend our money wisely. Just in my limited time.
I couldn't agree more with you.
It really is crucial. It's just like if you looked in the private world, you know where every paperclip goes. I just want to bring one thing out. I was visiting one of our new VA clinics in Morehead City the other day, a nice facility, but I asked them about mental health, and I'm going to follow it with General Bergman's question. I asked them when couldn't they get an appointment, given our absolute abysmal suicide rate in this country with our veterans. You know, they can get a first appointment for mental health, but then it is 4 to 5 months later to get their second appointment. And if we're not moving the needle on veteran suicide, what can be done about that?
Yeah, thanks very much. One, I just want to say we now have data for 2 successive years, 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021, where we did reduce. It's still too high. We did reduce veteran suicides. 1. 2, that wait time is not an outlier in the system for second appointments. You're absolutely right. This is a reflection of the limit that we have across the healthcare system in the United States, and VA is no exception, of trained mental health professionals. And third, that means we have to increase access in everywhere we can, and I'd be happy to talk more about that, and we have to go to more non-traditional methods. One I just want to call your attention to is a program where we are training and deploying veterans as peer support specialists with fellow veterans. Veterans in recovery, helping other veterans, which is not dissimilar, by the way, from something I'm quite familiar with, which is Alcoholics Anonymous, where an alcoholic in recovery mentors another alcoholic. We see that as a very effective tool. We now have 1,200 such specialists across the country, veterans helping veterans. Those are the kind of innovative new treatments as we increase the number of healthcare professionals that are going to be critical to continue the downward trend on suicide. We're better, we're nowhere near where we need to be, and we won't rest until we get to zero.
Thank you. And just one thing, I would urge you to reach out to academic institutions via telehealth. That's what I'm trying to do with our institution.
Definitely.
Because that moves the needle. And then finally, I just would urge, given all the money that you've requested, I'm a very staunch advocate of hyperbaric oxygen for some of these disorders, and I would ask that you consider using some of that for chambers.
Thank you.
I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Pappas.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for your comments. It's great to see you again here, and I appreciated your comments in particular on PACT Act implementation. I know that continues to be a big nut to crack. We look forward to working with you on that. Obviously, we've seen a very high volume nationwide of individuals signing up and filing claims, and I've heard good things from my VSOs in New Hampshire on this front, who are generally pretty satisfied with how things are going. But in delving into the numbers a little bit, my state kind of lags other similarly sized states in terms of the number of veterans that are enrolling in health care, filing disability claims through PACT Act. And I'm wondering if you could address outreach efforts as it pertains to PACT Act, any gaps that you're identifying, and how your department intends to fill those gaps?
Yeah, thanks very much. The numbers are, I think you can look at the numbers and see a big number, see a small number. So we had, sometime last week, we passed the 400,000th claim filed under the PACT Act. As I said, you can see that as a big number, see it as a small number. I prefer to see it as a small number, especially when one considers that there's as many as 4 million veterans who deployed into CENTCOM from 1991 to 2021. Question then is, why are veterans not registering, filing claims? Maybe trust issue. Veterans may have had a bad experience in the past. We are trying to accommodate for that in our outreach efforts. 2, there's still bad info, to include information that many vets fear an existing service connection rating will be lowered if they apply for the PACT Act. In the overwhelming, more than 90% of cases, your service connection rating is going to increase. It will not decrease. But this rumor is sticky enough in the community that that may be reducing certain filing. 2 other historic trends. Women, as Ms. Radovagan suggested, are not applying and have not traditionally applied at the same rate. Vika Mars, the soldier I talked about in the beginning, is an example. They don't see themselves as veterans. That is our failing, not theirs. And we have a nettlesome history of black veterans not applying at the same rate as their white counterparts, but also not having the success in getting ratings as their white counterparts. So we have to address each of these things. Last point, we're doing this in a very concerted way, in a joint way between VHA and VBA at the local level. And any of you who would like to work with us on a claims clinic in your district, we would love to do that. Those are the kinds of things we're doing in CBOCs, in hospitals, in VFWs, in American Legions, where we're doing claims clinics, we're doing toxic exposure screenings on site, and we're using that to drive this specific outreach. And we'd be more than happy to do more of that, although we've done a lot of it in New Hampshire.
Well, thanks, and I know we have a claims clinic scheduled next week, actually.
Great.
So we look forward to that opportunity and continuing the conversation, and I know the VSOs are very interested in being
Good.
a force multiplier on those efforts. I wanted to raise one additional issue with you. As you know, we have suffered at the Manchester VA Medical Center in terms of our infrastructure failing. We've seen flies in the emergency room on several occasions that have canceled surgeries. We had a major pipe burst in recent weeks that has flooded a large portion of the hospital, and cold weather left the facility without heat or hot water, which impacted a number of different services, including mental health and urgent care. I can't say enough about the hospital staff that worked round the clock to make sure veterans got appointments. They did a terrific job. But unfortunately, this is a recurring theme at the Manchester VA. We've seen some important investments in women's health care and mental health and other areas where services have been added. But I'm wondering if you can address specifically the issues there as against the backdrop of the larger picture of the need for more money for maintenance and hospital infrastructure.
Yeah, well, this is why that NRM number that we talked about a minute ago is so important, the non-recurring maintenance. You know, what do they call it? Arctic vortex or whatever that led to that burst pipe in Manchester, wreaked havoc also in Maine. Our ability to move quickly with that is dependent on having an agile and robust NRM. On the broader question about access in New Hampshire, this is why we're asking for the historically large, by an order of magnitude, investment in infrastructure in this bill, because it will allow us to get further down those skip list priorities to ensure that we get the care we need. The last point is, I think our team does a very good job of this in New Hampshire, which is the longer we don't modernize these facilities, the more reliant we are on the community. And that's a good thing and that's a bad thing. It's good if the community has access, but in many communities across the country, the pandemic has demonstrated that the private sector healthcare system is also full. So it's a good thing that we are collaborating with, getting better at paying, getting better at sharing records with our private sector colleagues, but they're not immune to the access challenges that we're having. And so this is, again, why we need the kind of robust investment that we're asking for in the infrastructure in this budget.
Thanks for those comments and for your specific attention to the issues at
Count on
Manchester.
that. Thank you.
Yield back my time.
Thank you. Congressman Van Orden, you're up.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. I also appreciate you hosting my ranking member, Mr. Levin, in your office is fantastic. I do want to make some comments referencing some remarks that were made earlier. I will remind my colleagues on this committee that there are several of us who have deployed repeatedly to combat, understanding that we could be killed and leave our wives widows and our children without fathers, that we have been to many funerals, and 3 of us have pounded our naval special warfare devices into several people's coffins and then buried them, and then got on our knees and looked at their fatherless children in the eye. So for anyone to imply that we do not understand the consequences of what we're talking about in relationship to service members' children is either ill-informed or disingenuous. So I echo the comments of the chairman of this committee that we will not tolerate that. We know what we're doing and we care deeply about what we are saying. And I would appreciate it if everyone would remember that. Mr. Secretary, I'm the chairman of a subcommittee that deals with the transition from being an active duty service member to a veteran. Many people do not understand that that process takes a millisecond. On Monday, you are an active duty service member. On a Tuesday, you're a veteran. During that period of time, you lose your uniform, you lose a sense of purpose, you lose a rank, a title, and that's when our servicemen and women kill themselves. It's my #1 legislative priority. My ranking member, Mr. Levin, I'm incredibly proud to serve with. His legislative priority is veterans' homelessness. We're doing this together. What I have found is that the problem is not with your organization. The problem is with the Department of Defense. Because when we try to work out our transition assistance programs, they feel like we're trying to get people to retire from the military early. I knew when it was time to retire. Morgan, you're medically retired. And Eli was only in the military for about 20 minutes, I guess. I have boots that serve longer than you, pal. Make sure that's clear. But we knew when it was time to retire. So we're not making people retire from the military. We want to make sure that we transition from being a productive member of the military to a productive member of society. So I want to ask you, what is your relationship with the Secretary of Defense? Because you guys sit at the same table.
Yeah.
I mean, do you talk to Lloyd? I'm going to call him Lloyd. You know why? Because I'm in Congress now.
Yeah.
Do you talk to Lloyd often?
I do. Thank you for the question. I'm also glad to know that somebody up here will understand my accent when I hear yours.
He's from Stillwater, Minnesota.
Yeah, that's right. He's a
got you.
cheese eater.
Yeah.
Although born in Minnesota.
Of course. To my shame.
I talk a lot with Lloyd about this question.
Okay.
So he and I have spent a lot of time together, including on things that, over the last 15 years, and things that you guys were all involved in too. I think, and yesterday's event at the Pentagon, where we actually had claims clinic, where we had toxic exposure screenings, we had 1,200 Pentagon personnel engage with us, a VA component, about the PACT Act, about toxic exposure screenings, is evidence of that. That he not only supports this, but welcomed us into the Pentagon to have these conversations.
So I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask for your help.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask for your help with the Secretary of Defense so that me and my ranking member, Levin, can get in there to talk to these folks, explain to them that we're not trying to diminish the military, we're trying to make our country better. So I'm going to ask you to help facilitate that.
Yeah.
And if we can all sit down together to get this done,
Yeah.
the country's going to be better.
Yeah.
Can you do that, sir?
I can. You know he was Army.
I know.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, it's, listen, yes, in a show of bipartisanship, I'll work with someone from the Army.
Okay.
All right? With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Mervan.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank you for your implementation of the PACT Act, the 1.5 million individuals who are receiving treatment now. Wherever I go, people talk about the success of that. And within my district, they also talk about the transition of the Mission Act also and how that is benefiting different members of my community. Today, I wanted to talk to you as chairman of the Subcommittee of Technology Modernization last Congress and my current role as the ranking member of Oversight Investigation Subcommittee. I've personally witnessed the acquisition and management challenges that VA is currently facing and has faced for years. As budgets grow, these issues are only going to become more pronounced unless we provide VA with leadership on these issues. Ranking Member Takano has introduced, and I've co-sponsored a bill to create the position of an Undersecretary for Management to help alleviate some of these issues. With the departure of the Deputy Secretary, it makes the need for leadership and coordination of management and acquisition initiatives across the VA that much more necessary. In your opinion, Mr. Secretary, what are your thoughts on that piece of legislation, and is it purposeful?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Mervan. I have not, I took a lot of notes when Mr. Chicano was speaking. I have not seen the actual legislative text. My first reaction is we need the undersecretaries we have to be confirmed. You know, we got our Undersecretary of Health confirmed last year. That's the first time in 5 years the department's had a confirmed undersecretary. We're still sitting with our we have our Undersecretary of Benefits. Hopefully, he will be confirmed. It's been at least 5 years, or 4 years, since there's been a confirmed Undersecretary of Benefits. So the first thing is I'd like to have like a full component to carry out the mission we currently have. One. Two, I think we take very seriously the fact that our information technology investments enable everything else we're doing. And I think we are among the leaders in the federal government. And that's why I think that's in large measure because of not only the people we have on staff, but also our new confirmed, or our new Assistant Secretary for Information Technology, Kurt Del Bene. He is not only a well-regarded technologist, he is a proven manager. And so I would hate to see him layered. But again, I'd have to look at the bill itself.
And I concur and agree with you, and the technology drives the vision. And then for my remaining time, I just want to address two things that you had mentioned.
Yep.
You said the trust gap.
Yes.
And you had mentioned that you want to close that, if I can ask how. And then secondly, you had mentioned the disparity in the African-American Black participation veterans in the system. How are you addressing to close that gap?
Yeah. The answer in both instances is execution. I can say all sorts of things, but until people see a different VA than the one they fear or the one they interacted with before, then we won't develop the trust that we need. Now, there are places where this is not an issue. And in those places, we see veteran to veteran, them talking to one another about and affirming to one another why they should go ahead and file a claim, why they should get their care at VA. And overwhelmingly, that is the experience. But there are still pockets where that is not the experience. And I'll tell the story of one very highly decorated veteran who returned from Vietnam and went to his VA, and they said, well, we only serve real veterans here. And he said, well, what's a real veteran? And the person said, World War I and World War II and Korea, not Vietnam. This is a person who worked for VA. He said he couldn't help but think that as a Native American, this person was also commenting on his race. So we simply, that person chose to wait another 50 years. That veteran chose wait another 50 years before he went back to VA. That's a failing, right? So when he comes back, we have to make damn sure that doesn't happen again. So we build the trust by executing. And when we do that, vets affirm to one another that this is worth their time. Until we do that, everywhere, they won't.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Luttrell is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. One of the biggest issues that I'm always presented with the veterans in my district is the electronic healthcare records. And I know you inherited this issue. It was mentioned also that maybe creating an undersecretary for management might drive that issue to bed. Do you believe that's a fact?
I think that right now we have a structure that's enacted by statute that says the budget for the EHRM, the electronic health record modernization effort, needs to be managed by the deputy secretary.
If that's in place, why has it taken, we're almost at a decade, correct?
Well, longer than that. This is a 20-year project.
That seems to me a problem.
You're right about that. You're right about that.
I would love to hear a timeline of when, hey, we're finished.
Yeah.
If you can give me an idea on that, please.
Sure. Right now, we're in negotiations with a contractor, Oracle Cerner, on the existing contract to finish this project in 10 years. We need a record that is up. We need a system that is up and functioning and that is responsive to our clinicians across the system all the time. The outcome of those negotiations on the contract, this is envisioned in the initial contract, which was, I think, awarded in 2018 or 2019. I think 2018. This is the review period. The outcome of those negotiations will determine our ability to do just that. So I'd be more than happy to. We've talked at length with Mr. Mervan, Mr. Bost, Mr. Takano, many of the members of the committee on this over the last couple of years that I've been in here. I'd be more than happy to stay on top of this with you.
This one is way too much time and way too much money.
You're right about that.
I'm in a very rural area, and we utilize our private institutions.
Yes.
And I'm by no means saying that VA hospitals and new VA hospitals aren't absolute, but are we missing the boat on possibly shifting our focus to allow our veterans to go to private institutes instead of pumping billions and billions of dollars to recreate new hospitals?
Yeah. So one is, I just want to make sure that we're focused on, I don't think as an entire healthcare system, we have the right amount. I don't think anybody believes we have the right amount of infrastructure, meaning especially in rural communities like yours, rural states like mine, that I think that we are under-resourced for infrastructure. And in fact, in many communities, the only healthcare facility is a VA facility, CBOC or hospital. 1, 2, we are aggressive about using the authorities we have under the Mission Act that Mr. Mervan just mentioned. Our budget this year going forward anticipates a basically 75%, 25% split on medical care between care in the direct care system and care in the community. Right now, we're running and have been running in the context of the pandemic about 70-30, if not 65-35. And we've tried a lot of different things to this is what I think Mr. Takano was talking about, make sure that those referrals into the community are the right thing. Who determines whether they're right? In large measure, the veteran, but we want that to be the veteran in coordination and consultation with their healthcare provider. Now, what we have to make sure is when our veterans are referred to the community, we actually get records back from that visit so that we're not in a resource-constrained health economy already. We're not having unnecessary procedures done twice and 3 times, and that VA can then coordinate that care in an effective way. That's the thing we do best, right? And so I think we do a good job of making referrals. I think there's people who think we refer too many. I think there's people who would wish we would refer more. I would like over time to be closer to 25-75 than 35-65. But what's going to drive this question is going to be what drives every question, which is veteran satisfaction and veteran outcomes. And right now, veteran outcomes in the direct care system are the best. Veteran satisfaction with outpatient care is largely the same. Where we sag is women veterans, veterans of color. Why? Because we don't have enough gender-specific care for women, and we have a trust issue that we have to continue to address with our veterans of color. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, for the most part, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm out of time, sir.
Representative
Thank you.
Deluzio, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McDonough, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
I want to echo something Ranking Member Takano dug in on earlier and share his concern around the budget and the idea of cuts and what their impact would be on the VA, on my fellow veterans. I've heard talk in this committee earlier in the month about cuts to discretionary budget. Earlier this week, an article in Roll Call dug into Republicans' Issues Conference and other coverage around cuts to discretionary spending. Those cuts, I think, would be devastating to the VA, come on the backs of my fellow veterans should they hit the VA. I read your letter, Mr. Secretary, to the Appropriations Committee Ranking Member DeLauro, a copy of it here, outlining the effect of a multi-billion-dollar cut for the VA. It's a disturbing letter, to be frank. Amongst other things, a rollback to fiscal year 22 funding would mean 13 million fewer outpatient visits in the VA for my fellow veterans. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include the letter in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Secretary, for my colleagues and others who have maybe not seen this, could you explain as plainly as you could, how would these proposed cuts cripple and hurt veterans' care?
Well, we've seen important historic growth in our budget over the last several years. Access to benefits has increased 71% in the last decade. Access to care is increasing. I laid out some of the numbers earlier. We would worry about going back to the FY22 number as I wrote to the Appropriations Committee because it would lead to as much as a reduction, as much as $26.7 billion in reduced investment to us. That would, as you've already suggested, reduce healthcare visits by 13 million, that's 9%. It would increase the time necessary to process claims at VBA, and it would lead to a $345 million reduction in our Office of Information Technology for some of the technology investments we've just talked about. So and then of course the kind of infrastructure investments the President envisions in this budget would not be possible. So we'd be back to something even less than what we've experienced in the last decade, which has allowed us to only build 4 hospitals in 10 years. And that's in a very resource-constrained healthcare economy already, including in so many of our rural settings. And so I would be very worried about our ability to meet the high standards that you all expect of the investments that you give us at FY22 levels.
I want to shift gears a bit to, and you've talked in some of the questioning, Mr. Secretary, about outcomes. We see tons of studies talking about the quality of care, the cost effectiveness of care in the VA relative to private sector care. Certainly, I'm proud to receive my health care at the VA, but we've seen ballooning costs on the fee-for-service care outside of the VA system relative to growth within VA medical facilities. Between FY22 and the revised request for 24, a 26.8% increase for VA medical services versus a 69.7% increase for care outside. Walk me through why we are seeing that growth explode on the one side. What is constraining the VA's ability to do more within VA facilities?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think there's a couple of things. The biggest challenge for us is the demands of the pandemic and the complications of care coming out of the pandemic. 1. 2, in the healthcare economy, we've seen a significant shift in where providers are working, right? So thankfully, over the course of the last quarter and a half, as I briefed in my opening remarks, we've seen a significant shift in hiring at VA, an improvement in hiring at VA. But throughout the course of the pandemic, between us and then even more so in the private sector, we've just seen shortages in key places, including in specialties. So a lot of that cost increase in the community reflects the need for us to move specialty care into the community because we don't have it at sufficient rates in VA to meet the wait times required. 3rd, that time frame corresponds to the enactment of the Mission Act. And I think the Mission Act does intend for it to be an easier experience for veterans to get care in the community. And that's not a value statement. I think that's just consistent with what the statute intended. And I think the statute is having its intended effect. So those are 3 of the trend lines that we're seeing. My goal is to make sure that we are adequately staffed such that we can, apples to apples, compete for veterans to come keep their care in the VA. When we're adequately staffed and when we keep vets in our care, we offer the best health care in the world. And I want to make sure that we're actively fighting for that vet's care at every turn. thing I can do to ensure that we do that is to make sure that we have all the people we need. The thing I'm asking you all to do is to invest, to make the investments the president's asked for here, to ensure that we have the institutions, the buildings, the technology, and the people to be able to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, my time has passed. Thanks for indulging me.
Representative Rosendale, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, always good to see you.
And you.
Initially, I was encouraged by the Department of Veterans Affairs press release on March the 3rd, 2023, that announced the relaxation of the masking requirement at the VA facilities. However, I was dismayed to hear that the Montana VA is not relaxing the masking requirement, and instead has interpreted the new guidance to enforce mask mandates across all clinics. My office received a policy statement from Montana VA stating that all Montana VA clinics will require patients to wear a mask until a majority of counties have low rates for a consistent amount of time. Quote, the metrics and reasoning are not well defined. Montana has not had a mask mandate for over 2 years throughout the state. Do you think that the transmission rates in Boise, Idaho should impact the masking decisions in Lewis and Clark County in Montana?
I absolutely dig into this. I'm not exactly sure what the transmission rate in either one is, but obviously the intent behind the new guidance is to...
I understand intent, but do you believe, just based on, I mean, everybody talks about hard science, real science, accurate science. Do you believe that the transmission rates in Boise, Idaho should impact the masking decisions in Lewis and Clark County, Montana, which is where Fort Harrison is located?
Yeah, I think that the new guidance gives the local leadership that is the authority to make those decisions based on the local conditions. In as much as Boise is not in Montana, it strikes me as not a local set of
Okay,
data.
so, well, we have a situation where transmission rates in Lewis and Clark County in Montana are impacting the masking decisions in Carter County, Montana. And these two counties are 8 hours away from each other. The same distance that it is from Boise, Idaho to Lewis and Clark County, Montana. This is what we're being forced to deal with. It's a huge state. You've been there. We have traveled together.
Yes.
And we cannot be utilizing the information from one county 8 hours away to enforce some kind of a decision in another one that, quite frankly, has been determined to be ineffective anyway. Despite the department's attempt to spin their new policy, the mask guidance could still result in veterans being denied care. They're being denied care, and that's unacceptable. Do you support the VA denying veterans medical care over their unwillingness to wear a mask?
Look, I think you're familiar with the strength of my feeling in ensuring that all vets get the care that they need.
Okay, well then we need to send that message down to the veterans hospital and facilities throughout Montana so that they understand that as well. This policy is a disservice to the veterans, and I am going to continue to harp on it and push back against it until the mandate is completely lifted. Secretary McDonough, the Oracle Cerner, our favorite subject, EHR has created a lot of safety risks, delays, and morale problems, severe morale problems at the 5 medical centers where it is currently implemented. You know how strongly I feel that it should not be introduced at any more facilities until all these problems are solved, and as we've stated for the last 2 years, until the system is fully functional. The Institute for Defense Analysis estimated it costs between $33 and $38 billion for implementation over the last 13 years, or over the 13 years. This is more than double the VA's initial cost estimate. More than double. I continue to see change orders and additional charges from Oracle to cover their shortcomings and unforeseen obligations and obstacles. What are you doing to hold Cerner accountable?
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. I think, as you know, we're in negotiations right now with Oracle Cerner to successfully deploy a fully functional system within 10 years. We're engaged in those conversations right now, and the way forward is heavily dependent on the results of those negotiations. We require, as you and I have discussed both privately and in this setting, efficient and properly functioning system across the entire system. At the end of the day, the vets don't care what technology we use. They just care that we have access to this. So that's what the purpose of the program is. That's what the goal of these ongoing negotiations is. And I'll make sure that we continue to keep you and your staff up to date on that and on any further decisions on not only on the contract, but once that's resolved, onward deployments.
Okay, I'm about out of time. I would just like to say that literally lives have been put at risk because of that system, and we need to make sure that it is functioning properly, fully functional, before it is rolled out at any other site. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you. Mr. McGarvey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate you being here today. As we've talked about, and has been discussed, we've talked a lot about the PACT Act and the resources given by the last Congress through the PACT Act to the VA. I know in Louisville, Kentucky, my home district, we get calls from our vets all the time. Even was stopped in a coffee shop recently by a vet thanking for the increased resources and what we're doing. So appreciate the tremendous work you all have done in that regard of getting out there, working on outreach, talking, getting a communications plan out there so people know about these new benefits so that not just they know about it, but as we've hinted to today, survivors, children's, that they understand these benefits as well. Of course, we can always do more, and we always want to do the most we can to help those who've served our country. And so just want to ask you first, how are you, Mr. Secretary, using the resources that Congress provided to specifically reach out to our underserved communities and our traditionally underserved communities? How are you guys promoting VA benefits and services, including those PACT Act benefits? And I think this is important, and I know I've asked you more than one question in this, but as part of this, how are you all measuring the reach and the impact that these resources are being given to you in this communication?
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, we're going about this as aggressively as we can, consistent with the additional both authorities and resources you gave us in the PACT Act to reach veterans where they are. So that includes traditional media, earned media. You gave us generous budget for paid media, aggressive use of social media. And each of those gives us metrics that we can measure, and we'd be happy to share those with your teams. We're also using our VA presence in communities across the country to talk directly to veterans and to make sure that we're demonstrating through things like claims clinics and forward deployed toxic exposure screenings so that veterans can see themselves what this means and can actually start the process to get them. And that's ultimately going to be the metric for us, which is service connections established, benefits provided, and care provided. At the end of the day, this is an outcomes-based effort. Everything else is inputs, and that's obviously important, but at the end of the day, meaningless. I want to get to the point where we're succeeding in such a way that veterans are talking to each other about the success of their engagements with VA. That is the most important thing which happens to be true in every other walk of life too. When somebody you trust, somebody with a similar experience tells you that something has worked out for them, it's going to make you more likely to try it yourself. And so that's our goal at the end of the day.
I appreciate that. I know you guys in getting this effort, and I agree with you that getting to that point where veterans are telling other veterans is going to be crucial in building that trust and getting people to get the benefits that they have earned and they deserve. I know you guys also use a lot of contractors to do this work. And just looking at this, does the VA right now have the resources to provide the oversight of these contractors? Do you feel you have enough sufficient resources?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm very mindful of what the chairman said in his opening remarks, which is that he kind of put a flag on this issue of the use of management consultants, I think he said. So I'm taking from this hearing that this issue keeps coming up. I believe we have sufficient checks on oversight of all the contractors we use, but it's a fair question. Let me, in all candor, let me take that and work it. Can I go back to your earlier question 1 second? I want to say one thing to veterans who are watching, which is, I think there is a belief sometimes among veterans that either they don't qualify, or they're not deserving, or that somebody is more deserving than they are of these benefits or of this care. And I guess I want to say the following, which is, this is not only care and benefits you've earned, but I want to directly address this issue about whether you would be taking something from another veteran or from a battle buddy. Because of the way we now use claims and our ability to automate the claims and all the data that comes from the claims, you filing a claim and telling us your story will help us understand the story of other veterans in your unit, other veterans in the unit you relieved, other veterans in the unit that relieved you. And so not only are you not taking something from another veteran, but in fact, you're helping us get a better picture of what your battle buddies have experienced. And that might actually open the door to additional care and additional benefits to your battle buddies, whom you may feel deserve it more than you. So the thing we want more than anything is for veterans to file those claims and to come in to see us. And those of you who didn't have a great experience with us in the past, we get that. We want to be better. I think we can be better. And surely you're all going to hold us to account on whether we are better.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that point. And Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I yield back. There we go.
Thank you. Representative Siscomani, you're up. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. Thank you for being here to give us your time and to testify on the department's budget. I'm proud to represent Arizona's 6th Congressional District, as you know, and it's home to about 70,000 veterans in Arizona. And as a member of this committee, I'm going to continue to support our veteran community and look forward to working with my colleagues and you to advance a bipartisan solution and solutions for those who fought to protect our country. So in light of that, in the last few years, the VetTech pilot program, which you mentioned in your testimony that you submitted to the committee, seems to have been a great success with 12,644 veterans having completed the program at an 84% graduation rate. The program boasts a 64% employment rate, and graduates of the program making an average salary of over $65,000 per year. With some of the best technology companies in America. However, it's my understanding that the funding for this pilot program will run out as early as May of this year. I've introduced bipartisan legislation that will make this program a permanent educational benefit offered to veterans. Would you support a permanent authorization of this program? And can you speak to the experience of the Department of Veteran Affairs in administrating this VetTech program?
Yeah, thanks very much. We're very proud of the VetTech program. We do think that we like working back from outcome. And outcome here isn't just the possession of the skill or the certificate that you have the skill, but rather a job. And when you think about what the American economy needs, especially in the 21st century, we need agility, ability to learn new things, ability to lead people, ability to operate in a complex environment. Those are all skills that our veterans have woken up and judged themselves against, been judged against for their entire career. Our then challenge, if they already have those skills, is how do we give them, or how do we help them get additional skills? VetTech has proven itself. I'd be happy to look at a permanent authorization. I'm just not going to commit to it yet because I want to make sure I understand, consistent with the tone of the rest of the discussion, the cost and how we would account for that. But it is a high-performing program. We feel quite good about it. Vets seem to find it useful. And at the end of the day, the outcome measure that matters most, which is it leading to jobs and increased quality of life? The answer seems to be yes. So it's very attractive. I'll be happy to look at a permanent authorization with you.
Thank you, Secretary. Madam Chair, I yield back.
All right, thank you. Representative Ramirez is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, I think it's still morning, so good morning and welcome, Secretary McDonough. Today, I want to speak about I want to address the proposed $31 billion cut to the VA funding that will directly impact the veterans I serve in Illinois' 3rd Congressional District. It's no secret that homeless veterans remain at significant risk, with their numbers rising steadily in recent years, as we've talked about today. And we also know that many factors contribute to this trend, such as unemployment, mental health issues, and substance abuse disorders, all of which can make finding stable housing extremely difficult. And as such, I know that one of the priority initiatives for the VA is ensuring that people experiencing homelessness veterans experiencing homelessness are able to find permanent housing. I was pleased to see that the VA's request came in for $3.1 billion for its homeless programs. And it's a continued investment of resources and funding to provide services to veterans at risk of experiencing homelessness. I also know that it is a lot cheaper to help someone prevent homelessness than someone who now has to become homeless and then get rapid rehousing. I know that for a fact it costs 3 times more when someone has lost their home to be able to move into permanent housing than the prevention work that we do. And so I'm really grateful that we continue to do this work, and that last year we permanently housed 38,000 veterans. A lot due to the additional funding and flexibilities provided in the COVID relief packages. Can you, Secretary, explain to me the potential effects funding cuts and the pending expiration of the pandemic flexibilities will have on progress towards reducing both sheltered and unsheltered veteran homeless?
Yeah, thanks very much. We are very proud of the work that we've done to reduce veteran homelessness. We set a goal to house 38,000 homeless vets last year, calendar 22. We actually housed about 40,400 vets last year. We have set a similar goal this year. This year's goals also focus on, as we have going back to 2009, prevention of homelessness, as you suggested. We believe that, and we show that VA programming since about 2009 has prevented homelessness for about 1 million veterans and family members because of the agility and the flexibility of the funding that Congress has generously given us each of the last several years. I do have a particular concern about the grant and per diem rates going forward after the expiration of the public health emergency. We're working through that with our homeless program office, and we'll talk to you guys about that. I would worry about reduction in that traditional bipartisan support for homelessness programming, and especially as we're getting good progress, good momentum on the numbers that we're facing, and especially understanding that for many of our homeless vets, getting them under a roof is the first step to addressing whatever issues may have led to homelessness in the first instance. Yeah. Joblessness, mental health, untreated mental health disorder, substance use disorder. I feel really good about our success. I feel good about our transparency on this. I feel good about our outcomes. That's why the president's asking for $3.1 billion this year.
Thank you, Secretary. I know my time's running out, so I want to really quickly pivot to GI benefits for student veterans. It's critical we protect veteran access to quality higher education, but currently we don't have a pathway to address what happens to veterans' GI benefits if they've been defrauded by their college. Today, I'm introducing a bill to change that, and in fact, restore GI benefits for those veterans who have been defrauded. Approximately how many student borrowers who have filed a borrower defense claim with the Department of Education are veterans utilizing a GI benefit?
You know what, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I'd be more than happy to get you that specific number.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. So just to close in these 3 seconds.
Time's running out. Apologize.
I want to thank you for your work, and I will continue to work with you to make sure we don't cut vital services to our veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Representative Crane is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Secretary McDonough, for showing up today. I know you got a lot on your plate. Must be a tremendous job. And from talking to you briefly, I think one of the best things about my perception of you is that I do believe you have a heart to help and serve and support one of our most important communities. I do want to address real quick what is becoming a theme up here, and I don't think it's going to go away, but Mr. Ranking Member Takano's remarks about the math not working with MAGA Republicans wanting to return to 22 levels and cut spending. He said the math doesn't work. You guys want to know what math doesn't work? The fact that year after year after year after year up here, we continue to spend more money than we have. That's why we have over $31 trillion in debt. One of my other colleagues over here said, if we cut money from our budget, it would be disastrous to our veteran community. You guys want to know what would be disastrous to our veteran community? If we went completely bankrupt and we plummeted this country into some third world nation because, again, nobody up here in any committee hearing that I ever go to talks about spending less money or being more responsible. Yeah, they talk about being responsible with the money that we spend, but you never see them wanting to make any cuts whatsoever. I'm telling you right now, because I'm looking at a bunch of folks out here in chairs, and I know you guys have kids and grandkids, and I know you love this country and our way of life here. I'm telling you right now, if we don't knock this stuff off and quit making it partisan or political, the fact that we keep spending money we don't have, my kids, your kids, and our grandkids are not going to have squat. Period, point blank. That's just a fact. And I really hope I'm not alive to see that day and all the blank faces when that day comes and your kids can't afford to go to college or a car or a house. On that note, Secretary McDonough, you said you are letting data drive the future spending that you're looking at in 23, 24, 25 in this record budget. Does the $31 trillion in national debt factor in to the data you're using to create your historically large budget, sir?
Yeah, the data I was referring to there is the data for the TEF, the Toxic Exposure Fund, which is obviously governed, as the statute suggests,
right,
by any incidental dollar over the FY21 baseline. So that's the data I'm talking about. How many vets, what kind of care, what kind of benefits, and so that we can then certify to you that we're following the law.
I know. And I don't want to downplay your job, sir, because, again, I know it is very difficult. But I want you to think about that, and I want you to consider it, because, honestly, when I talk to other folks, other secretaries, nobody seems to be factoring that into their data. It seems like everybody has front sight focus on I'm just going to get through the next 2 years, and I'm going to do the best job I can for this little group that I look after, and I totally understand that. But the bottom line is we are bankrupting this country, and nobody wants to do anything about it but pay it lip service. The next question I want to ask you, sir, what are you doing to make sure that vets aren't hindered from utilizing the Mission Act, where they can utilize private facilities, doctors out in town? Because I know you have this goal of having world-class healthcare, and I think that's great. I really do. But here's another fact. It's very difficult for the U.S. government, or any government for that fact, to compete with the private sector. And one of the reasons is because the private sector doesn't have to deal with a lot of the bureaucratic red tape that anybody in government does. And so I want to make sure that we are championing the Mission Act and making sure that our veterans have access and they are supported in going out into town to use private facilities and private doctors as well. Sir?
Thanks very much for the question. As I mentioned earlier, that last year, we had 38 million community care appointments. Now, the question is that too many or is that too few? I choose to, as I said earlier, let the results tell us, and the most important result for us is the veteran experience. Each time a veteran has this engagement, an engagement with us, we ask them a survey that's designed to get to three things. Was there ease? Was it easy to get access? Was the engagement with us effective? And then an emotional quotient, so the 3 E's. The emotional quotient is, did you feel respected? Were you treated with dignity? Our data suggests that's good. There is unevenness across the system on this. Some veterans, and I know you and I have talked about this, there's veterans in different communities across the country who feel that they're being denied that right. And when you see those, I hope that you'll raise those directly with me, and we'll get to the bottom of them. But I also want us all to be mindful of right now, as we come out of the pandemic, access times in the community are not great either.
Right.
And so I want our veteran to be able to get the care they need when they need it with a good outcome. That's the basis on which we'll make these decisions. I will tell you, though, as we've discussed, my guess is at the end of the day, I might be more defensive of the system and keeping more care in the system
We're
than
up on
you
time.
might be. But I'll never let that predisposition drive the outcome. The outcome, the goal here is the outcome for the veteran.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. And Representative Landsman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary. I appreciate it. I just want to comment on a point that was made about spending and our budget. Obviously, this is a hearing about the important investments we make in veterans, and I agree that we can no longer pay lip service to this issue. I think there's a debate as to how we resolve it, and many of us, including a lot of Republicans, believe that it's about paying a person's fair share in taxes. And if you get to a place where our tax code is fixed and everyone is paying their fair share, we'll have a balanced budget and we won't have to do anything to undermine the work that you're doing to help veterans. I went to our VA. We have a great VA facility in Cincinnati this past week. I was, as I always am when I'm there, really taken by the professionalism, the care, the compassion, but also just how packed our VA always is, and the fact that when folks come in, they get tremendous care. I mean, they get the best care, and the data says as much. I have just a few comments. You're happy. I'm more than happy to have you comment on them. They're not questions as much as they are just things I would love to put in the record and share with you. One is, when a veteran comes in, they get great care. On the mental health issue in Cincinnati, in particular, incredible care. Nearly half of those veterans who commit suicide, however, never receive mental health care. So I think one of the questions is, how do we look at what others are doing in terms of best practices, getting out into the community, doing that outreach? Social media is one thing, earned media, how do we get to where folks are living and build those relationships? Because I think those are dollars well spent to get them in the door, and that's boots on the ground more than anything else. Number two, there is a big backlog in claims. Obviously, the PACT Act is a big part of that. I think something around 200,000. So as you're looking at the budget and investments, I think investing in the staffing required to alleviate those backlogs is going to be really important. And then three, I'm really glad that you mentioned Mr. Del Bene and his work, because he was instrumental in making sure the ACA that system worked. And having his leadership, to me, will be transformative, and not doing anything to undermine his ability to get this thing where we need it to be is really important. And so I'm glad you said that. So with that, I yield back my time, unless the Secretary wants to comment on any of those.
Well, out of sensitivity to everybody's time, let me take and come see you about the specific things we're doing on outreach. I agree with you very much. And then, what are we also doing to find veterans who are not tethered to us, but maybe tethered to something else? I've talked to some members of the committee about interesting other technologies, capabilities, processes, and there's one called, I think it's called Towering Oaks, that we're now looking into because one of the members has raised that with us. So let's find vets where they are.
Yeah.
Let's support what works, and let's take care of them.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for being with us again today. We're very deeply appreciative of your work here. A few questions. Last year, we spoke about the prevalent issue in Charleston, South Carolina at the Ralph H. Johnson VA Center. The cost of living in Charleston is enormous. To rent an apartment nearby, 3-bedroom apartment for a family of 4 will cost you $3,000. You go 2 miles down the road, it'll cost you $5,000 a month to month. It's just the price and cost of living post-COVID has just been enormous. And so housing costs have been up almost 30% over the last year and a half. I get complaints all the time in our office from those that work at the VA and the inability to make ends meet with the jobs that they do. And they have one of the most important jobs in the country, as you're aware of. So despite the high cost of living, locality pay combines both rural and city cost of living, as you know, and it disrupts the data in Charleston, right? That doesn't really impact us in the way that it should. We talked about this last year, and I realize that GSA plays a primary role in establishing locality pay, but certainly you have a voice and can advocate for these issues, because we want to give our vets the best and the brightest that we can offer, and that means they've got to be able to afford their bills and afford their rent in very expensive places. So my first question is, what's been done in the last year since we last spoke? And what do we need to do now? How do we fix this? I don't want to have this conversation a year from now and just, be talking about all the good things we're going to do and then we never get them done.
Yeah, fair enough. I remember our discussion last year. I know that you and our staff in Charleston takes great pride in that sign on the facility, which shows it's the highest ranked hospital.
But what have we done in the
South
last
Carolina.
year? Specifically,
Since we discussed this last year, I've raised this issue of locality pay, rest of the U.S. versus some locality pay bump for Charleston and several other of our
is
localities.
there a legislative fix? Like, how do we get this for these
Unfortunately, the way
localities?
locality pay works is there's Congress has set up a salary commission.
Yeah.
We work that with OPM. I'm hoping we're in a position to address that. The next time you and I talk, I can't say when that gets resolved by OPM.
Yeah.
Third, we are exercising what we call special salary rates for particular capabilities everywhere we can. I can get you the numbers of what that means.
Are we doing it at the
Charleston?
Ralph H. Johnson? I would love that information
I'll get you
after
that
this
information.
hearing.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
The one that's going to come new next is one for technologists in particular. OPM's been very helpful with us on that, especially with all the tumult in the private sector and technologists being laid off. We think we should be competitive there. Special salary rates will help us be competitive there. We'll get you the Charleston specific.
Yeah, that would be great. And then I have a few other questions. A lot of us have talked about veteran suicide. 6,500 more or less vets commit suicide every year. And are you familiar with the 7 privately funded MDMA-assisted therapy clinical trials being conducted at different VA facilities around the country?
Yeah, in as much as I know about them, yes. Am I intimately familiar with them? No, but I'm proud of the fact that we're testing a lot of different things across to try to make sure that we're doing the most effective
In the studies
thing.
that
I
have
did
been
visit
done at
one
these
last
VAs
week
that
in
are privately
Orlando.
funded at 7 facilities around the country, do you know the effectiveness of these trials with vets with PTSD? Do you know how effective these breakthrough therapies and plant-based therapies have been for the vets?
I can get you the answers.
I know the answer. The answer is 88% have seen a significant reduction overall in their PTSD. And even better than that, 67% of vets who've gone through breakthrough therapies, we're talking about MDMA specifically, when they do 3 therapeutic sessions, a controlled environment over an extended period of time, the percentage of those that have 0 indications of PTSD is 67%. So if we're going to lose 50 to 60,000 vets to suicide over the next decade, what do we have to do to get this plant-based therapy, the breakthrough therapies to our vets so that almost 90% of them have seen a huge improvement in their quality of life, their depression, the improvement in their PTSD, 88%. And then you've got 67% have 0 indication of PTSD. This is huge. And so far it's been privately funded. What do we got to do to get, I guess there's been about $559 million set aside for suicide prevention. This is it. I mean, this is just huge in what it can do for our vets. So how do we get this to all of our facilities across the country? What do we got to do to get there?
Yeah, well, we have the National PTSD Center of Excellence. We're very proud of. We consider ourselves nation's leaders.
67% of vets who've been through these trials at 7 of your VA facilities see 0 indication of PTSD after going through 3 sessions of MDMA. This is, I would encourage you to get read up on it, get educated on it, understand the data and the science and the statistics behind it, because this is literally life-saving measures for our veterans. And there are many of them here who were on this committee who sacrificed everything in their lives, were willing to take a bullet for our country, and I hope like hell that we can do what's right for them so that they don't commit the number of suicides we're seeing on a daily basis. Thank you, and the chairwoman will yield back. Thank you. Next up, we have Representative Budzinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and Mr. Ranking Member, and Mr. Secretary. It's nice to see you again. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a couple of weeks ago. I think when we visited, I had mentioned that as a new member of the committee, I was going to go back home during recess and establish a Veterans Council to hear directly from veterans throughout Central and Southern Illinois about their concerns, and so I can bring them to this committee and really be the best advocate I can be. We did that last week in Decatur, which was great. We had a diverse set of veterans that were participating in that discussion. I also had the opportunity to visit our Decatur Veterans Clinic that we have. We have 2 clinics, as I know you're aware of. One of them is in Springfield, and I have to say there's a lot of excitement in Springfield that we're going to be getting a new CBOC facility there. So I do just want to mention, I look forward to continuing to work with you and your team on the progress of that CBOC, because there was a lot of great discussion around that. But one of the issues that came up during the council was around rural health care and access, and so that's really where my question is going to be focused on. The pandemic changed not only the way we care, the way care is provided, but also reshaped the actual care delivery structure across the country. As you know, more than 600 rural hospitals, which represent nearly 30% of our system, are at risk of immediate closure because of poor financial performance in 2022. And other small sites of care disappeared entirely during the pandemic, and I can say that my district is certainly not unfamiliar with this reality. While in some parts of the country the prudent decision would be to buy care from the community, it simply may not exist in some communities. VA must ensure it has developed best practices for delivering care in rural and highly rural communities like those, as I mentioned, in my district. So my question is really related to the budget. The budget request specifically notes the Office of Rural Health, quote, expects to see significant expansion of many of these programs in 2023 and 2024 as new sites are added and new rural access innovations are created. So my question, Mr. Secretary, is given what I just outlined, can you help me kind of to better understand why the funding for our Office of Rural Health remains stagnant at FY23 levels for FY24 and FY25?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And obviously, the Office of Rural Health we've expanded that over the course of the last couple of years, and we will continue to use that as an important platform. But the medical care account will allow us, and then the infrastructure account will allow us to using the analysis from the Office of Rural Health to make sure that we have the care in the communities where we need it, where our veterans are, mindful, as you say, that the whole topography of healthcare delivery, especially in rural communities, has been deeply affected by the pandemic. I take great pride in the fact that among healthcare providers, VA is often the single most robust investor increasing access or ensuring access for our rural vets. So that's the first part of the answer. Second part of the answer is we're also going to continue to use the new platforms for the delivery of care, including through our Office of Connected Care, which again would not be funded by the Office of Rural Health. The Office of Connected Care will make sure that we have forward deployed capabilities in our rural communities so veterans can connect through telehealth, even in areas where broadband is not sufficient, highly rural and rural settings. So think of it as the Office of Rural Health as a key component, a key coordinator of all the other investments that we're making in rural communities. Veterans are more likely to have to be in rural settings, and as a result, we take very seriously the need to ensure access across all of our communities in the country.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. I'll yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I think you and I are called the survivors of this briefing.
Well, I haven't survived yet. When it's done, I'll call myself a survivor.
First of all, I want to address some of the comments that I heard. And by the way, this is Cabinet Secretary Day on Capitol Hill. I apologize for having to step out, as everyone has, but we have multiple Cabinet Secretaries here today. I want to address some things I heard early, though, before I left. The cuts to VA. When you look at the VA today with this request, that would be a 45% increase just from 2020, from $220 billion to $325 billion. So that doesn't sound like much of a cut to me over 4 years to increase by $100 billion. So let's take a look at the percentage of veterans. It's continued to go down since 1970. Obviously, our World War II vets are aging, our Korean vets are aging, our Vietnam vets are aging. So we tend to look at post 9/11, but as a percentage of our population, veterans are decreasing as a whole. And then the last one I want to look at is the increase in employees in the VA. Let's go back to the 2020 date again. You've gone from 389,000 to 453,000 over those same 4 years. So $100 billion, 45% increase, those employees. So I've got 3 topics that I would like to address with you. The rehire of the employees that were terminated under the last administration. I think even one of the papers called them bad apples, but I'll leave that to you to describe them. Under what authority are you rehiring? And you and I have had this conversation on the phone, so this is for the record. Under what authority are you rehiring them, and what are the circumstances? The second topic I'd like for you to cover is veteran suicide. Obviously, it's not in my district, but it's in the Metroplex, the Dallas Metroplex, the second largest VA center in the nation, I believe. Well over 200,000 veterans in that area. I will tell you that the veterans that I talked to, and frankly, I was at something called the Veterans Outpost just a couple of weeks ago, and the veterans really don't want to go to the VA when they have suicidal thoughts. They want to go to a local organization where they can talk to fellow veterans or people who understand them. So I see your $52 million for I think it's $52 million for grants. But I think we ought to reorient the suicide to get them into the local organizations because there's even a mental hospital in the area that would be happy to help. So I ask you to take a look at how we are preventing suicides amongst our veterans. it may not be they want to go to big VA. They may want to go to the smaller organizations, the local organizations, where they can talk to fellow veterans, people who can truly understand them. But my last topic is, as you know, the deputy director of the VISN there in Dallas. I do not believe, and I am getting an earful on this, so this is another local issue, but it is the second largest VA, which is why I'm bringing it up. I don't think that he was given due consideration for the top job. He's done a fine job for years, and did you post the director position in the Dallas VISN?
Yeah, Mr. Self, thanks so much. On the first question, there's a section of law called Section 714 of the the VA Accountability Act and Whistleblower Protection Act. And sometime in the 2017-2018 period, that section of law was used to relieve thousands of VA employees. There's been a series of administrative actions at the Merit System Protection Board, at the National Labor Relations Board, and then also judicial activity in the federal court system that has found that the exercise of that authority at that time was inconsistent with established practice and statute. I sent a detailed letter to Mr. Takano and to Chairman Bost about this topic earlier this year, because as a result of all of those findings, we obviously have to work with the representatives, in large measure the union representatives, of those employees who have now have these series of administrative and judicial rulings such that they may have authority to try to come back. That's the subject of an ongoing set of negotiations, so I want to be careful about what I say in public about this. But my commitment to you and to the committee is to keep you fully informed about how this proceeds. This is why I sent the letter I sent to Mr. Takano and to Chairman Bost earlier this year, to make sure that you had a good understanding of the statutory and legal jurisprudential basis for this ongoing set of conversations. And, you know, I believe in the context of those settlement negotiations, we can come to some reasonable outcome that ensures that if there are bad actors, that they will not have to come back to VA. So that's the first issue. The second issue on veteran suicide, thank you very much for raising it. I think your point about making sure that a veteran goes where the veteran feels comfortable is extraordinarily important. And so what we apply to this is an all of the above approach. So yeah, those veterans who want to come to big VA, let's get them into big VA. Those veterans who reach us through the veteran crisis line, if they're in crisis, we're going to get them into care today, irrespective of where it is. We're going to get them into crisis today. So any veteran who's feeling crisis today, please contact us. Dial 988 and then press 1. We'll get you into care today. Those veterans who want to go to, you know, what used to be called VA without the hassles, the vet centers. We have 350 vet centers across the country. Counselors available to you today in retail settings, in Dallas, throughout Texas, in California. Those counselors, trained counselors, largely veterans, including combat veterans themselves. And those veterans who need to get care in the community, we are moving a lot of mental health care into the community. That is to say, through the community care program. We make those referrals, we then pay for it. Lastly, and most importantly, Mr. Takano led the enactment of new statute that says to any veteran in crisis today, Go to get care anywhere, in the community, at VA. Go to anywhere to get that care. There'll be no copay. There's not going to be no pay. We're going to take care of your emergency situation. That's an important set of new authorities that Mr. Chicano has ensured that we have gotten. It's incumbent on us to use those effectively. We're about, Mr. Chicano, 6 months into the exercise of those authorities, I believe. We're late in getting them started. We're still learning about how this can function and function well. That feedback to us is really important, feedback from vets, from VSOs, from the Veteran Outpost. That will make us better at this new authority. But look, we're going to do all of the above, including, as somebody earlier talked about, the Sergeant Fox community grants, which is now we're on into the second notice of funding opportunity. We've moved about $50 million. This envisions another $50 million into local organizations where those organizations know their veterans best. Let's invest in them so they can help our veterans most. I hope that's responsive to the questions, Mr. Self.
And,
oh, sorry, on
and
Dallas.
the deputy.
On Dallas, yeah. So you're right. I looked into this yesterday. It was not listed. And I can get you more information behind why that was the case. I did check in with the VISN director. And we should have a conversation about that, if you don't mind, in private. I will say this. I am told that our leadership in North Texas, for the North Texas system, prioritized the data stream that we think is most important for performance, which is the veteran experience data stream. And in the hiring for this position, because that data stream had not been as strong in the North Texas system as it has been in earlier periods, they prioritized somebody with a proven track record in addressing that, is what I'm told. So again, I think we can have a broader conversation, but I want you to know I did, after we had our conversation yesterday, follow up personally on this issue, and I'm more than happy to stay in touch with you personally on it.
Please do so, Secretary, because we have the second largest, again, well over 200,000 veterans that are served by this medical center. And I believe the man chosen came from a 17,000 veteran center. There's a vast difference between the two in the skill sets. With that, thank you. I turn to the ranking member for any closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your testimony today. I look forward to have my staff get together with your staff. Obviously, Chairman Boss and I, have a lot of concerns about the second bite and the TEF, and I look forward to working that all out with you.
I picked that up.
And it's mainly in the service of wanting to get you more authorizations and more bills through, like Ms. Brownlee's Elizabeth Dole caregiver bill, which I know you care about, and there may be some disconnect between Congress, OMB, and your department in terms of just what is going on with our TEF process here. And so anyway, I hope we get that straightened out. With regard to the chair's comments about the increase in funding for VA, it is true. Funding has increased, and I want to point out that even though the total number of veterans has decreased, thanks to medical science, we have seen veterans come back from conflicts who would not have survived in previous conflicts and who have far more complicated comorbidities. And medical science in general has meant that notwithstanding veterans' combat experience, people are living longer with more comorbidities, and it's become more expensive to take care of the number of veterans that we do have. So the cost of health care is rising, is universally rising. We see it expanding in private sector health care, and it's not any different for VA health care. And it is part of what we're seeing, what I see in the Department of Defense. wanting to relieve themselves of an obligation to provide health care for active duty. We're seeing people on TRICARE for Life who located near military bases, believing they could get access to the military hospitals, being denied that access because the military wants to reduce its cost exposures. And where are they going? They're going into the community, which also has a shortage of folks. So I believe that we need to solve this problem of not enough practitioners, both in the private sector and for the VA, which I also believe is understaffed. How are we going to do that? And how are we also going to take care of the military's needs? Because we need combat surgeons. We need combat teams. I share the chair's interest in making sure that a veteran in crisis can get to the emergency care that they need without having to worry about the cost, and by the way, without worrying about their eligibility for VA care. The bill that was successfully signed by President Biden says that even if you're a veteran that's not enrolled in VA, if you're having an emotional mental health care emergency, you call that emergency number. Sorry, Mr. Secretary, can we repeat that number? I think it's important. What's that number? 988, and you press 1, right? 988, press 1, and you can be connected with someone at VA who can get you connected with care that you don't have to worry about the cost for. And that includes care in the community. Finally, to just say, yes, I believe that many, many veterans would prefer mental health care in a community setting. But let's also remember that that statistic, whether it's 18, 20, 21, 22 veterans dying a day by suicide, that the ones that, those that are connected to VA care are actually less likely to die by suicide. So there's something about being connected to VA which is actually helping to reduce the risk of suicide, so that connection to VA is important. But I also want to acknowledge that there is a segment of the veteran population that, for whatever reason, would prefer to get their care elsewhere, and we have to be respectful of that as well and make sure that we have the capacity to do that. With that, I look forward to working with my colleagues across the aisle and all over the Congress to make sure that the interest of our veterans is fully served, and we'll make sure that we fully implement the PACT Act as you are doing. It's a revolutionary bill. Thank you for the work that we've been able to do together, and I yield back.
There seems to be nothing new under the sun. In Vietnam, we had PTSD and Agent Orange. In Afghanistan, we continue to have PTS, as we refer to it now, and burn pits. So there seems to be nothing new under the sun. I will comment on the 22 number of suicides a day, whether that's the exact number or not. I think it is still true that that does not include California and New York. Is that correct? They do not report?
I don't believe that's true.
Okay.
I believe it does include them.
It does include all of them, okay. In any case, the number is too high. I ask unanimous consent that the written statement of the co-authors of the independent budget be inserted into the hearing record. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that all members shall have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. Hearing no objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.